welcome to today's episode of the SaaS Marketing Show. I am super excited to be joined today by Bill King, who looks after SEO and paid acquisition at Drift. So if for any weird reason any of you out there listening or watching to this don't know too much about Drift, they are the world's only conversational marketing platform and, in my opinion, one of the best SaaS companies on earth right now when it comes to actually marketing themselves. So I'm really excited to have you here, Bill. Welcome to the show.
Awesome. Thanks for having me.
Today, we're going to be talking about how you guys at Drift actually approach SEO for new product launches that you do. And this comes off the back of a LinkedIn post I actually saw from you last week, where you took like a screenshot of some SEO traffic increasing pretty rapidly, about 2 plays that you've made over the last 6 months that are performing very well for you guys. So I'm excited to dive deep into that. But before we do that, maybe let's just talk a little bit about kind of you, the team at Drift, how things are structured. On your LinkedIn profile, it mentions that you look after PPC and SEO and like acquisition. Could you just break down for us kind of what acquisition looks like at Drift, and maybe what the team's like, what you do on a day-to-day basis, etc.?
Sure. Yeah. So I joined Drift about almost a year ago. It'll be a year in May 6th. Right before I joined, they kind of launched the traditional demand generation team. They had toyed around with a couple different models. They did a growth team who owned first click all the way to active user, and then they also own lifecycle as well. But about 3 months before I joined, they decided to have a more kind of like traditional function for acquiring users. And then our retention growth team kind of works on like lifecycle retention, features, usage, all that type of stuff. So it's kind of allowed everybody to kind of really specialize in certain areas of the things that they do really, really well. And so I joined. The team was actually quite lean when I joined in terms of demand generation. We were doing like traditional kind of webinars, trade show type of like traditional type of stuff. And I was the first like digital acquisition person. We had a girl named Sarah who owned Drift for Drift. So she was the person building the actual bots, and she also owned conversion optimization. So the two of us together worked on kind of the real big pillars of how you acquire users, the traffic, and then the conversion rate as well. In that time, the team has scaled up quite significantly. So now I would say it's more of a split between brand and demand. Whereas when I first joined, it was a lot of creative content, like brand type of folks. So we're kind of like, we're balancing the boat a little bit. And yeah, so things have been crazy. We're growing like a weed, and we're actually hiring too. So if you guys are listening, come on over and work for Drift. That would be great.
Thanks for sharing that. So the reason I ask is I'm really interested to see how, as a company grows like you guys are, because you guys have grown a lot recently. Like I was looking before we did this interview just at some top level numbers around like fundraisers that you guys have done. So I think the last one was in April of 2018, $60 million raise. That was the 3rd time that you guys have raised money. I'm seeing Drift everywhere on like LinkedIn and social specifically too. That might be because I'm a big advocate of the brand. Like, Hey Digital, we're a partner agency with Drift as well. But whenever I'm looking at, okay, which brand should we look at in terms of who are doing marketing well and creatively, like Drift is always one of the top 3 that people look at, right? So what's it been like going through that growth? Because even just with PPC, right, or with SEO, they're two, of course they work together very well, but that's the job of so many different people. So how do you like structure that time? I know you said you have now a split between like brand and demand. I like that terminology too. I like that way of putting it. Are you the kind of the sole person that's managing all of the paid activities? Do you have multiple people within those kind of areas too, or what does that look like?
Until 3 or 4 months ago, I was the only person doing all that stuff. They've had some other folks that they've worked with, like we've worked with agencies in the past, and like some other folks have dabbled in certain areas of that stuff, but nobody kind of owned it. So when I first started, I was the only person kind of doing acquisition. We just hired Molly Clark, who's fantastic. She came over from Zoom Info. So the team's growing, and yeah, so we're because we're known as like a really great brand company. That actually there's a lot more to that, I think, than most people think about. They see the brand and they see like how we're all kind of involved and everybody's out there all the time. But I can't like overstate how important this is from a performance marketing standpoint. If you are going to work on a brand that has no recognition in the market, your job is way harder, right? That's pretty clear and that's obvious. But the question is like, how do you go about that? Which one do you invest in first? Like, what are the, how do you approach that if you're a founder? Those are the questions everybody's asking. So at the time when they were building Drift, actually, I knew most of the folks that started the company because we worked together at a previous job. I went to go do a startup in Charlotte, North Carolina, and then came back up here to join the team later on. But at that time, they were kind of like in the apex when everybody's doing performance marketing, everybody's doing PPC, everybody's doing Facebook ads, everybody's doing all that stuff. And so if you think about it, if you step away from like what you're comfortable with and you think to yourself, where's the value in the marketplace? Is it going to compete with someone for a 0.25% of better conversion rate or click-through rate from this PPC ad? Or is it like, let's go separate ourselves and create something different that has long-term tangible value that we can continue to build on? So like the whole like Drift, like everybody knows the brand, like all that came together as obviously very strategically, and they invested in marketing early. I think a lot of teams, like they wait until they have PM fit and like people are kind of excited about it, and then they're like, all right, let's put marketing on top of that. But I think that they were strategic in the sense that they were like, okay, how are we going to separate ourselves from the pack? We can build an awesome product, we can do a bunch of performance marketing, but like everybody does that. What's something that can separate us and create a moat around this thing we're building? Because if you think about brand is like, it's all the pieces. And when I say like, the thing that's most exciting about Drift's brand is it's not just like marketing. It's like we have a really great customer success and support team. The experience is awesome. The product is fantastic. The like marketing and just the general tone, we try really hard to like be relatable to people, and all that together creates something really special. And when you're sitting there and you have this type of opportunity, you're like, wow, the brand is already well known. So now as a performance marketer, you sit back and you're like, wow, this job's got to be kind of easy if you think about it, because like the really tough parts of those traction pieces are kind of already covered. And it's just about you monetizing the easy to win stuff and then build these other moats like around the tougher competitive spaces that you need to really grow fast. So I would say like, if you're a founder out there and you're thinking, how do I like think about building my team? I would say like, it's probably pretty smart to get someone who's thinking about the brand and stuff like that early on, especially nowadays where commodities are software. We've all got the same tools. We're all reading the same content. Like it's tough to find value out there, but I think those things are very important to think about early on. So.
Yeah, I agree. That's really valuable advice. Thank you for sharing that. I'm super interested. Maybe this is me being a little bit like greedy, I guess, and asking some personal questions. But from whenever we're working with our customers running their PPC campaigns for their SaaS companies, that's like what we do. That's our sole focus. We often have, as the companies continue to grow, there's always this discussion around how you measure the impact of brand on PPC, right? Because it's like you'll see the branded campaigns that are up and running, they're always going to have like really great performance metrics, right? The costs per conversion are always low, etc. And some customers that we work with at the early points of launching branded campaigns have concerns around those, and we answer those questions in various different ways. But for you guys, it must be a really interesting use case because the brand is so strong at Drift. And you said earlier on that you kind of separate brand and demand, but how is that a difficult conversation for you when it comes to, let's say, reporting or measuring success of either SEO or PPC? Like how does that affect things? Like, do you treat brand totally separately, or
No.
How does the team look at those things at Drift?
Well, we all win together, that's for sure. And I think like everybody has an understanding that if for us to win, everybody has to be really good at what they do, right? So the design has to be on point. The site structure has to be well done, and we can't be having this stuff go down, and all the like everything creates that halo effect over the brand, and then it's up to me and the other people who work in the demand gen team just to monetize that, right? So like if you're thinking about dollars in, dollars out, and I think as like just marketers in general, we've always been like, okay, well, I can rely on this model. I know that if I do this PPC campaign, that like within a certain percent of variance, this is the type of customer I'll get. Everybody can do that though. And so like when you're thinking about like how do I create an advantage, that's super important. But I think like the team is well aware that each person has a big critical role in how we all grow. Like the moves that they've made on building the team out are very, very intentional. We have kind of traditional content. We have a ton of folks who work in like video and brand and design. And that isn't because we just want to throw like cash out the window. It's like all these investments create this overarching feeling of when you interact with Drift, and those have secondary benefits that you can measure. You can see a look at just the general awareness and demand of your brand in general and how many people act on that. Then you start thinking a level below that, which is like, how many people are not just aware of Drift because it's cool and like they can learn about stuff, but like, what are our products names? Are they like increasing demand over time? Like, does that trickle down, or is it just people know about us? So all those things are super important. And like, there are great brands out there who, like a good example, someone I admire a lot is, well, one of the brands I admire a lot is Ahrefs. So like, they not only build a brand, but then they teach you how to execute your job with their tool and their content. So it's not just empty investments. You're like creating this flywheel over time as you get these great experiences, and eventually it builds up.
Yeah, I think that's a super valuable point that a lot of people miss. Is like, content can, like, we shouldn't be doing content or any marketing activities just for the sake of doing content or marketing activities, right? We should be creating valuable like assets or things that are actually going to help an audience. And I think sometimes people don't know how to do that. So they'll end up just creating like a lead magnet or a piece of content for the sake of it, when actually, if you look at, there are ways that you can structure your content to be useful, entertaining for people, and still promote your product without it being like an overly promotional piece of content. To say like Ahrefs do a great job of doing that. And I think that's really important. Cool. So thanks for sharing that. It's really interesting to hear a bit more about the kind of inner workings of you guys and the team. Now, I want to go straight into our topic for the show. So as I said, I saw a post on LinkedIn from you a few days ago, or last week now, about how you guys are approaching SEO for new product launches. So the post that you shared was a little bit about the Drift video product and what you're doing around that, right? So maybe you could just give us a quick kind of rundown as to what that post is all about, how you're approaching Drift video at the moment, and then we'll go into some tactical things around SEO for product launches.
Sure. Yeah. So at the highest level, Drift itself as a brand has kind of like 4 critical pillars. We have the platform, which contains multiple products. We have our chat product. Everybody knows that product. We have our email product, our automation product, which is technically a layer across all those products because it touches each aspect of it. So we've also got a video product, and that's where the play that you saw me talking about came in. And so there's the core user of Drift are very specific people. It's like marketers and demand gen folks, performance marketing folks at like kind of like SMB plus, but really like mid-market plus. Those are like the real core like platform users. And then we're building all these different kind of like pillars around the brand. So the video product is kind of a new thing for us. And so we're starting to build like presence in the BDR, sales folks who are doing a lot of outreach. Now, I would consider video kind of like a startup within Drift, kind of like it has cross alignment with the chat product. And some of those folks do use both. But right now it's in kind of like launch and figure out who's this right for, who's willing to pay for it. Like we're learning every time we acquire a net new user for video. And that value is actually super, super important because as we grow that flywheel of like net new users, we're trying to build kind of like a Loom style acquisition engine where after we acquire people, they invite others. And because video, you send it out, there's that loop. So the challenge with each one of those products is, and I think actually video is probably the most interesting because we're still figuring out kind of like, is this its own thing or like, is it integrated deeply and kind of like, how does that, like the people who acquire, who start up using video, do they also use the platform? So as we're learning a lot of these things, we're starting to think about how do we then invest to grow the product? So if you look at video on its own, the average revenue per user is quite low. Now, if you start thinking, okay, how many of those users can we then convert over to platform users and how does that affect the economics? That is a whole different discussion, but I don't think we're there yet for that to be concrete. So what we did to kind of try to learn quickly, grow users without investing a ton of capital. Because really what we're trying to do is we're not trying to sink a ton of cash in, acquire anybody possible, and then figure out the monetization later on. We're trying to be thoughtful about how we grow the user base, about how we grow the investments we put into it. So that what that does is that kind of limits to like what you can actually do to actually go acquire users for that platform. And so when you have a low, like first year revenue product, you have to start thinking about ways that you can get users as cheaply as possible, but also as targeted as possible. So for new product launches, that I guess we're going down the path because that's the most relevant and the most recent kind of like new launch that we've done. So for that one, it was more about like, okay, let's test paid. Let's try to see if we can acquire some new users. We tried to get as low as we possibly could, and we're like, this is okay. It's not quite where we need it to be. So we started looking at like, what are some SEO plays we could make, and who are the people we're competing against, and how are they getting traffic? I think that's super important. Like if you're launching a brand new product, take a look at what they're doing. There's tools out there you can see, like you can take a look at what channels people get traffic from relatively. And then if you see that like there's a dominant channel, like a good example is some of the competitors for us in video, they get a lot of their users from 1 or 2 channels. And then the network effects afterwards kick in after they get to a certain threshold. So for video, what we're trying to do is get as many like high qualified users as cheap as possible to let those kick in. So for SEO, for that specific channel, is very low cost. It takes time to build, but once you build it up and you have a pretty good idea of what areas you should be in, you can continue to build that over time, and that pays off quite a bit. The other thing too is like someday maybe our target for CAC might be a little bit higher, and then we can go put paid on top of it. But we don't want to build the user base just on paid, because that's a tricky situation to get into, because once you turn it off, it's off.
Right.
So what we were starting to think about is like, okay, if we can't pay directly to get someone to sign up to use this, what are the things that we can build that, like, what are the hypotheses we can say that that person would be looking for before they sign up? So before someone knows about video, because actually Drift is well known, but the video product isn't yet. So we're kind of building its own funnel to start with. So like, so the thinking there was, all right, we have to acquire people who are users of video. That's number one. Number two, we want to get paying users. We don't want to just grow anybody on the platform. So we really want to get salespeople, or people who are in like BDR roles, who are doing outreach and who are sending cold emails and who are doing prospecting. That's like the person who's going to hand over the money. And then there's other like scalable things just to grow the user base. Because what happened was we started doing a lot of these plays just to get sales users, people who would pay for it. That's growing, that's nice. But then after using it internally, we're like, man, a lot of us just send like updates with this product, or like our customer success team are sending videos to our customers explaining like a product change or a feature that they could do or something like that. And we're like, wait a second, there's something here. So overall, our baseline play was like find the users who are willing to pay, build some funnels around that. And now we're starting to think, okay, after realizing that there's actually a lot of use cases here, there's other flywheels we can start to build. So there's like customer success, there's support, there's like leadership type of presentations you can give, and the chatbot's like right next to the video. So there's a lot of plays there. So I guess this is a really long answer to what you're asking, but basically what I'm saying is like, it started with the business model. Like we limited the amount of channels that we thought were the highest payoff, and we doubled down on those things. And so as we're acquiring users, one of the things we built was a microphone test and a test for your webcam video quality, because the hypothesis was, what's one thing, how do we get people who are high enough intent that they would try the product, but large enough scale of traffic that this would be worth it for us? And so we're doing keyword research, and we're like, wow, there's actually some competitors who are doing similar things like this, where they're building these little apps to help people get more out of their video experience. And so not every person who clicks onto that page is like the core salesperson who would use it. And so that took some selling internally for me to explain why this strategy makes sense, because it's not a one-to-one relationship between all that. But the topic was large enough that I was like, let's try it out. And so obviously the conditions that we have right now have changed the market, and more people are starting to use video. And so therefore more people are looking for ways to get better video experiences. And that's where that that project took off.
Yeah, I actually think that's a really interesting point, because I was going to ask you, like, okay, so you look at the competitors, you look at what their traffic channels are, you do some keyword research, you see what they're driving traffic from, what their articles are like, how you can improve on those, etc. But then, like, peeling back the layers a bit more and trying to get to that point where it's like, okay, you understand these are the target user groups and these are target customers, and then instead of just creating content for them, the like step before that, you're almost going back one more step to kind of reverse engineer. Okay, what's the first thing they're going to be looking for, to then do that test, and then like, instead of going straight for the, okay, trying to rank on a page that's like video, like sales video tools or something, which everybody else is
That's right.
doing, more competitive. I guess the interesting point is like, how do you get, there's not really a tool that can help you do that, right? That's kind of a combination of keyword research, looking at other people, but then just your own like team brainstorming and intelligence. There's no other way that you can do that, is there? You just have to sit down together and think about, okay,
well, I don't think it's magic. It's like digging into the people who love this, who are like pumped about it. And like, you have to, so what you said about the whole like optimizing your page for a specific term. So we still do that, but what we do is I take like a portfolio approach, where I'm like, where are the big scale, maybe not so targeted things we can do? And then how do I counterbalance that with like product page optimization? Like when you're looking for video selling software, like we should theoretically be there, but that is only going to grow us so much. So like, how do we balance scale and targeting as well? So.
Right. Yeah, for sure. That's really interesting. Okay, cool. And then you said obviously that at the early stages of this, you're trying to find that balance between running paid campaigns, which are going to drive that traffic and get people here straight away, whereas the SEO is stuff that takes a little bit longer to ramp up, which makes a ton of sense. Like, is that how you're approaching a lot of different, whether it's new products that you launch, campaigns that you're running? Like, are you always combining PPC and organic, or like, how do you look at that? Because I had someone on the show, his name was Nick from a company called LearnWorlds. He was on the first episode that we did, and he was talking about how the team at LearnWorlds use PPC to inform their content strategy, and their content strategy to inform their PPC strategy. How do you, being in the role where it's like all of these things combined, how do you approach that? How do you use both of these different areas to continue to propel the business forward?
That's actually, so I would say, I think I'm at an advantage by being in this kind of like blended role, because it's all about the data. Like early on, you build a product, you have a hypothesis that something's going to be interesting to people. There are a certain amount of people who are willing to pay for it. If you work your way from there up, you're at an advantage. If you don't have that data and you're like searching around to find who's willing to pay for it, what are the topics they're interested in, you're in a tough spot, because you have to make many more bets before you figure out what works. What we try to do is when we launch something brand new, early on, it's super important to just really look at like the core users who are willing to pay for it and dig into that data. So a good example is like for PPC, you could validate a hypothesis on paid like that, because you can quickly get scale, you can quickly get learnings, and then you can take those people that you acquired and you can say, all right, these ones didn't work, these topics were total crap, and it was just fluff traffic. But this, interesting, what do we learn about these types of topics? Because you have the data to validate those ideas. But if you don't, you're just running around and spinning your wheels, right? So like early on, I've made so many mistakes with this, but make sure you have the data right. Like, you don't want to wait too long, but make sure you have the right stuff in place so that when you learn, you can go quick off that stuff. So for us, it was like, with a low like revenue product, you can get in a real bad situation where if you burn too much cash just to build the product, number one, it's dangerous. Number two, you're not sure if people actually really are pumped about it, right? Because paid is something you kind of like, you force the initiative, right? So if you got SEO and you got like virality and all these other things that are working together, if those are working, there's probably something there. And so if you dig in the layers of like what's working on those channels, and then you're like, okay, I know with reasonable certainty that if I spend money with these types of people, I'm going to get that cash back. To me, that's super important, because I don't want to I think the old school, like, grow as fast as possible and then figure it out later, I think that's kind of like dying. I just think a lot of people are smartening up about that stuff. So
yeah, because it's like great if you can acquire a ton of users or customers really quickly, but if you can't keep them around, if you can't like build a brand and encourage, like the reason so many people love Drift, like you said, is yes, you have a great product, but there's so much more behind the great product and products that you have. Like even us as a like working with the partner team, for example, the whole experience is just fantastic. Like if when we're using Drift itself, like the customer support, like there's people always there all the time who will always get back to us super fast. Like there's so many different elements. And I think that's something that especially any early stage SaaS marketers or founders that are listening to this, they're all the time they're looking for like, okay, what's this one or two channels I can quickly experiment with? And that's fine. Like I know we've talked about a couple of plays that you guys are doing to approach like SEO or PPC for a new product launch, and that's fine. But I think it's also really important to cover, as you said at the beginning, these things work, but they work so much better when you have a blended like strategy around everything else, when you're thinking about brand, when you're building community, when you're making sure the product is good. Like all of those things lead to better conversions in any of the other marketing like experiments and actions that you're taking. And I think that's something that a lot of people miss sometimes, is they're just trying to
think like
quick things.
Well, the beautiful part about like being when you market to marketers is they have a strong voice and they're willing to let people know. So that can work for you or against you. Right. So make sure you have those things together. If people are willing to, if you want to live off the fruits of people compounding your story, well, make sure you have it right, because if you don't, then it can work the other way as well.
Yeah, totally. Okay, cool. So just to kind of recap some of what you said, I think if I was to do one takeaway from this in terms of, okay, what can someone do to approach SEO for either a new product launch or just their SaaS business that they're marketing or building at the moment? I actually think one of the tactics that you shared that's really valuable is not just looking at all of the traditional SEO or PPC activities that people take, but taking a step further back and thinking, okay, before my prospect or target customer would sign up to our platform, don't think about what they would do before that, but think about what they would do 2 steps before that. So for you guys, it was identifying, okay, we have this video product, and maybe if we create a piece of content around a microphone audio quality test, we know that's something that's going to drive a lot of traffic kind of 2 stages before purchasing. Same with the webcam video quality test. And I think that is actually something that a lot of people could think about, like depending on what their software is. Think about what kind of, doesn't have to be a micro site, but I've seen people have success with that too, like building sister sites or micro sites to help build virality and then drive traffic to their platform. But think about what else can you do that supplements your product well. I think that's one really good strategy that you talked about amongst everything else. But aside from that, maybe is there one other thing that you guys are doing right now that you're like really excited about, in whether it's SEO, PPC, marketing, any like one quick tip that you could share with people that you're seeing good results from currently?
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, I can tell you one thing I'm really excited about. We launched this new AI product, and I think a lot of people like hear that word and they have a different, like many different reactions to it. But this is a true, like, we build a model from the ground up. It's not a shared model across all your different chat conversations. It's like literally we have an engineer who works with you and analyzes your conversations and builds like a custom model. And that's not like for everybody yet. It's for like a lot of the larger companies who have like a lot of conversation volume and this and that. But like right now it's in its infancy. And someday there could be a day where like you are able to automate your entire sales funnel. Like that's the vision we're trying to do, is like go down this path where like there's no discernible difference between your best sales rep who's on your website and this bot. That's what we're trying to do. So if we get there, I think the exciting thing about that is like that frees up marketers and sales and businesses to kind of like do more exciting stuff. And what I'm pumped about, like a lot of about the stuff that's going on in the world, is like, I think, so we did a webinar on with SEMrush like last week. And so we were talking about SERP features and featured snippets and all this stuff. And like a lot of people ask me all the time, hey, you guys have so many people in the content, like design and video and audio. I think that used to be a nice to have. I think those days are coming to a close, where like this whole hire an army of like content people who are just going to sit there and like publish away SEO articles. I think those days are dying. So I think if you look at like a lot of the SERPs out there, it's like YouTube videos and like podcasts are now starting to infuse. And it's like really what that means is like people want to be able to pick the medium that they want that's kind of right for them. So I would say, don't think about that as brand anymore. Like, in order for you to get access to the people that you want to market to, the way that they consume content has been changing for a while. And I think now, like, as Google's helping marketers be able to surface those things better, it's really important for you to start thinking about diversification and doubling down on the things that work. So, like, go do a bunch of different things, validate if it works, and then double down on those types of things. So I think these rich media formats are like the future. I really do. And a lot of the data supports that as well. So, like, if you look at, we're trying to grow our YouTube channel. We've got we've got several podcasts. We've got our growth podcast. We've got our CMO podcast, our product podcast, like all over the place. And we're growing those, and they're growing every day. And like, it's not overnight, but we know that these bets are not something we're going to win right away, but we know it's going to pay off in the long run. I think it's super important to like have a mindset of experimentation and like understanding oncoming trends, because not that long ago, Drift didn't exist and people were still using forums and this wasn't like a thing. So just have context. Like, this was only 3-4 years ago, right? Mm-hmm. So as marketers, I think it's so important, like, start thinking about the changes in consumer like consumption and the preferences they have, and just like, really our job as growth people is like reducing friction and increasing value. So if you can just reduce friction, increase value, so whether that's your content product or if it's your actual product, start thinking about the ways that people are changing, because I think pretty soon a lot of this like text-based format is gonna not be the preferred medium. So that's one thing that we're going hard on this year.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's exactly how I'm thinking about things too. And it's really good to hear, like, get that validation, I guess, right? Because you say the market is changing as to what people want to consume. There's so many different options out there right now. And I think traditionally within SaaS, like SaaS marketers, it's very easy to just stick to the activities that have always worked, right? And the SEO activities, the content activities, the webinars in the same way that we've always done them, and just driving people to demo in the same way that we've always done it. So I think, as you say, things can change so much in such a short period of time. And I think if you start to leverage these things now, there's never going to be a negative to it, right? As you said, it's like, if you start a podcast now, or you start creating more video now, or you start whatever it might be, if you start doing that now, you're never gonna regret that at any point. It's always a good building block for something else. Yeah. And
that's like, so that underlying like curiosity, you should be willing to make a ton of bets that have low like investment, but potentially high payoff, right? You could do this podcast for a year and maybe 1,000 people listen to it through the course of the year. That's tough. But if you really understand like the people and the changing preferences, you'll know that that's okay. Keep doing it and keep executing, because someday that switch is going to happen, and you don't want to wait until later on. So, because that's the people with big budgets. That's what they can do. They can just turn on the switch and switch things over. So I think it's really important to stay curious with that stuff. So
yeah, for sure. Awesome. Well, Bill, thank you so much for like sharing all of those insights about Drift, about what you guys are working on. It's been really great chatting to you. So yeah, thanks. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, my pleasure.